You lie back, letting your eyes grow heavy, listening for a story not about kings or conquests, but about the small, stubborn rhythms of daily life, the quiet details that shape the world far more than most would ever guess. Tonight, we'll drift back through centuries of dusk and candlelight to places where history moved slowly, across fields and cloisters, kitchens and workshops, where survival depended not on heroics, but on patient hands, shared burdens, and the simple miracle of making it through another ordinary day. Have you ever wondered who kept the candle burning in the deep night of a medieval abbey, or who coaxed bread from coarse flour and cold stone? What about the uncelebrated women, whose hands scrubbed life clean by the river, or the quiet minds who copied stories by candlelight, letter by painstaking letter? History, it turns out, is built not just on battles and royal decrees, but on countless unnoticed acts. A nun tending her bees for wax, a baker kneading dough in the dark, a surveyor stretching his chain across dew-soaked fields, a scribe hunched over a cold desk with cramped, ink-stained fingers. These are the slow miracles, repeated day after day, generation after generation, that kept the world turning and the darkness at bay. So as you settle in, let your mind wander beyond the tales of crowns and castles. Instead, follow the scent of baking bread, the hum of a beehive, the hush of an ancient vineyard at dawn. Each story tonight will be a gentle journey, one that honors the patience, resilience, and unnoticed brilliance that shaped the days and nights of those long gone. What quiet secrets lie behind every simple comfort we now take for granted? And who are the forgotten hands that made history, one humble task at a time? Let's begin. You might not have pictured medieval history buzzing with bees, but for the women behind the high stone walls of an abbey, the low, constant drone of the hive was a daily companion. Picture yourself walking slowly along the mossy flagstones behind a quiet convent. The air is thick with the scent of green herbs and distant bread. A row of carefully tended hives lines the southern garden wall, each one painted with a faint whitewash, designed less for beauty than for function, much like the nuns themselves. This is not the history of kings or knights, nor the epic stories of war and conquest. Instead, this is the daily, repetitive, nearly invisible work that kept the monastic world aglow when the sun went down. Candlelight made from beeswax, harvested, rendered, and shaped by the quiet labor of women who have mostly vanished from the pages of popular history. In medieval Europe, bees were both practical livestock and symbols of divine order. The rule of Saint Benedict, which governed the lives of many nuns, did not specifically mention beekeeping, but over centuries, abbeys became centers of practical knowledge. Nuns learned to tend gardens, keep animals, and, importantly, maintain beehives, an almost magical enterprise that gave them access to the precious golden wax so vital to their daily prayers. You, standing in this long-forgotten garden, would see the hives positioned carefully to catch the morning sun and sheltered from the harshest winds. Early spring was a time of hope and anxiety, for the nuns depended on the bees' survival through winter. Each hive represented months of work, each bee a miracle of nature, each pound of wax a treasure to be rationed. It began with simple tasks, keeping the hives clean, gathering flowers to plant nearby, and watching for signs of disease or predation. The nuns would move quietly among the hives, speaking little, using smoke to calm the bees. There was skill in every motion, a gentle hand to lift the lid, an attentive eye to notice when a colony seemed restless or when a queen might need replacing. Harvesting. The honey was a ceremony all its own. It was a slow process, carried out with care so as not to anger the bees or waste their hard-won stores. In early summer, the first combs would be removed and brought inside to the cool stone rooms of the convent. The honey was a treat, used in medicine and sometimes for special feasts. But it was the wax the nuns prized most, for without wax, there was no light. Beeswax candles burned cleanly and brightly, unlike the smoky tallow candles made from animal fat. In a world without electricity, this made all the difference. Only beeswax was suitable for the altar, an offering considered pure enough for God. The nuns would gather in a quiet workroom, scraping the wax from combs, melting it in great iron, pots and pouring it into carefully prepared molds. Some days the work could feel endless. There was always something to do, checking the hives for swarms, mending baskets, weaving new skeps from straw, gathering wild herbs to scatter among the garden beds. In the winter, the nuns checked the hives, praying over them, listening for life inside the dormant clusters. Through all these daily routines, the sisters found meaning in the monotony. The regular hum of bees, the measured work of hands, the gentle prayers murmured under the breath. It all wove together into a tapestry of devotion. Every candle lit in the chapel represented hours of quiet, unseen labor. Every flicker was a testament to the endurance of ordinary women, carrying their community through the dark. As you imagine yourself in their shoes, feel the weight of the wax in your palm, the sting of a careless moment, the satisfaction of a full jar of honey set, aside for a feast day. These are not stories of grand adventure, but of persistence, of seasons repeating, of life lived in small circles. Did the nuns ever tire of the work? Almost certainly. Did they resent the bees, the stings, the endless maintenance? Maybe, sometimes. But in the ritual of the hives, many found a rhythm, a sense of stability and peace that outlasted wars, plagues, and the rise and fall of noble houses. Still, as the years passed and the world outside changed, what happened to these women and their bees? Did the knowledge survive as their abbeys crumbled and reforms swept through the church? Did anyone remember the quiet labor that kept the candlelight burning, night after night, century after century? You might ask yourself, what was it really like to live a life defined by such slow, repetitive, essential work? Knowing your efforts would likely go unrecorded. Your days measured not in great deeds, but in candles burned, hives tended, and prayers whispered in the half-light. But what of the bees themselves? How did their fate become tied so closely to the fate of the women who kept them? And what happened when that ancient partnership began to fray? Step quietly through the cloister garden as another day dawns. The sun rises slowly over the convent walls, gilding the dew on grass in the tiled roof of the chapel. Within these walls, life is measured by bells, seasons, and the tireless labor of hands, human and insect alike. The bees emerge first in spring, their activity a living clock for the nuns. Sister Agnes, oldest among the bee tenders, is already up, standing in her rough-spun habit with her veil pinned back, watching the first few honeybees spiral upward, venturing out in search of the earliest blossoms. She's learned to read the language of bees. She can tell when a hive is restless, when it's content, and when it is in trouble. Her knowledge is practical and quiet, handed down from sister to sister over generations. Spring is the time of hope, but also of work. The convent's gardens are planted with purpose, lavender and rosemary for fragrance and healing, clover and thyme for the bees, marigolds and borage for their bright, sturdy blooms. Every bed is weeded, every herb is placed with care, because the nuns know that every flower matters. Their bees need pollen, nectar, and protection from pests. As the days grow longer, the work quickens. The hives must be watched for signs of swarming, a colony's natural urge to divide and multiply. If left unchecked, a swarm could mean losing half the bees. So the nuns listen. They watch the entrance of each hive, searching for a sudden flurry of activity or the unmistakable low buzz that signals a new queen is being reared. When the time comes, Sister Agnes leads a group, veils covering their faces, hands steady as they coax the bees into a new skep woven from local straw. It's a careful dance between patience and decisiveness. A botched move could ruin the colony or infuriate the bees. Inside the convent, other sisters prepare for the harvest. Sister Joan, whose hands are nimble and sure, heats water over a hearth to prepare the combs. The air fills with the aroma of beeswax, sweet, earthy, and somehow clean. There's always a moment of quiet reverence as the first honey and wax of the season is brought indoors. The wax will be melted and filtered through cloth, then poured into molds to make candles. The honey is set aside for medicine, treats, or sometimes for trade with neighboring villagers. For the nuns, self-sufficiency is not just a virtue, it's a necessity. Daily life for a medieval nun is simple but not easy. The rules of the convent are strict and the days are long. Prayers begin before sunrise, followed by labor in the garden, the kitchens, or the scriptorium. In the busy seasons, tending the bees becomes an act of devotion, a way to serve both God and the needs of the community. There's little time for idle conversation, but in the beehive yard, the sisters occasionally share stories, a memory of a harsh winter, a recipe for cough syrup, or an old superstition about bees carrying prayers on their wings. Summer brings its own challenges. Drought can wither flowers and threaten the bees' food supply. Rain can drown blossoms and rot the hives. Sometimes a colony becomes ill. Mites, foul brood, or mysterious disappearances that leave the nuns anxious and sorrowful. When disaster strikes, the sisters work together, moving ailing hives to safer ground, treating them with herbal remedies, or simply praying for better luck next year. It's in the long, slow process of candle making that the invisible becomes visible. The melted wax is poured and cooled again, each step requiring patience. For altar candles, the wax is carefully strained to remove impurities. The finished candles are tall, bright, and pure, reserved for the holiest occasions. Smaller candles, rougher, and sometimes flecked with pollen, are used in the scriptorium, where the nuns copy manuscripts by hand, the flicker of beeswax light illuminating ink and vellum late into the night. There are times of celebration too. On feast days, the sisters process through the cloister with lanterns, filling the air with singing and candlelight. The bees are honored in their own way, with an extra sprinkle of sugar or a quiet prayer of thanks. The cycle of seasons continues. Spring's frantic labor, summer's watchfulness, autumn's harvest, and winter's rest. But the winter brings worry as much as rest. In the cold, the hives are wrapped and insulated with straw mats and woolen blankets. The nuns gather in the quiet of the dormitory, whispering hopes that their bees will survive until the thaw. The sound of a single buzzing insect on a warm winter day is enough to send ripples of relief through the convent. Through the decades, abbeys and convents across Europe become centers of bee knowledge, their practices shared in slow, careful networks. A letter exchanged here, a traveler bringing new ideas there. Yet much of this expertise is quietly lost in time, scribbled in the margins of ledgers or mentioned in the annals of saints' lives, overshadowed by grander events. As the years pass, small changes begin to erode this ancient partnership. War, plague, and shifting fortunes bring new challenges. Abbeys are dissolved, lands seized, and sisters scattered. The hives behind the walls fall silent. A few convents keep the tradition alive, but most vanish, and with them, the intricate wisdom of generations of bee-tending women. You might wonder, as you listen, what it meant to be so intimately connected to another living creature, to depend on their survival for your own comfort and spiritual well-being. What did it feel like to lose that partnership? Slowly, quietly, perhaps with a final season of honey harvested in silence. Did the last nun to tend the convent hives feel regret, or a sense of peace in the face of inevitable change? And what of the knowledge, passed hand to hand, mouth to ear, across centuries? How much remains, hidden in old letters, half-remembered, rituals, or the careful tending of bees by new hands who may not know their heritage? Imagine now the later centuries, the convent walls weathered and streaked with moss, their gardens gone wild with neglect. The slow decline begins almost imperceptibly, one generation of nuns growing smaller in number, another unable to find a novice willing to kneel in cold chapels before dawn. The world outside changes, and within, the old rhythms falter. The bees sense it first. Perhaps the careful hands that once tended the hives are fewer now. Perhaps the herb beds lie untended, and the weeds creep up around the wooden skeps. The low hum that once filled the summer air is softer, interrupted by long silences. Yet for a time the nuns continue. Even as their order dwindles and the church's priorities shift, there is comfort in the ritual. The plucking of herbs, the sweeping of the hive yard, the slow rendering of wax over a smoky fire. Records from the later Middle Ages and Renaissance show the gradual disappearance of monastic beekeeping. Abbeys and convents, once so self-sufficient, are dissolved or repurposed by secular powers. Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries in England sends shockwaves across Europe. Sacred hives are abandoned, sold, or destroyed. Sister Agnes, or someone like her, must make impossible decisions. What to save, what to let go, what memories to carry in secret as she leaves her lifelong home. But not everything is lost. The skills the nuns possessed seep quietly into the world beyond the cloister. Displaced sisters, forced to seek shelter in villages and towns, sometimes carry with them skeps full of bees, or knowledge of where wild colonies might thrive. They teach local women the old ways, how to smoke the hives, how to read the patterns of the comb, how to pour a candle that burns bright and clean. The lessons echo, faint but persistent, down generations. Meanwhile, the world outside grows noisier and more complicated. The invention of new lighting, oil lamps, gas, and finally electricity, slowly erases the need for the humble beeswax candle. Where once a candle's light was precious and rationed, now it is abundant and taken for granted. But in the few remaining abbeys, the tradition persists. The flickering altar candles still molded with care, the quiet hum of bees, still a reminder of lost centuries. It's easy, from a modern perspective, to overlook these small threads of history, to imagine only grand abbots, towering cathedrals, or the fierce politics of popes and kings. Yet the history of the world is just as often written in wax and honey, in the worn hands of women whose names were never recorded. The light that spilled from a convent window late at night, illuminating a handwritten prayer or the face of a weary sister, is as real a part of the human story as any coronation or conquest. Now, in your mind, step once more through the empty cloister. The sun is setting, the stone corridors are cool and silent. You pass by the abandoned hive yard, and for a moment you can almost hear the old rhythms, a gentle buzzing, the rustle of habits, the soft voices of women at work. It is a kind of ghostly persistence, a memory kept alive not by monuments, but by habits, stories, and the continued keeping of bees. You might wonder, what did all those centuries of slow, careful work mean when measured against the tide of history? Did it matter that the beeswax candles flickered for prayer, that honey sweetened a sick sister's cup, or that generations learned to find patience and devotion in the company of insects? Perhaps the true legacy is not in the survival of any single convent or hive, but in the broader inheritance of quiet resilience. The world is brighter now, noisier and faster, but somewhere, someone still tends a hive, perhaps recalling, without knowing, the hands that did the same in shadowy gardens so many centuries before. So tonight, as you lie in the half-dark, imagine the warmth of candlelight made by hands long gone, illuminating not just a chapel, but the small, stubborn hope that something quiet and necessary endures. The nuns and their bees may be forgotten by most, but the light they tended, however ordinary, however boring, still finds its way into the present, flickering on in memory, patience, and the small tasks that bind us to the past. And as you drift into sleep, you might ask, in a world where almost everything is recorded and measured, what else of quiet importance has slipped through the cracks of history, waiting to be remembered? You find yourself on a cold, gray morning, the kind where mist clings low to the fields and even the crows are reluctant to call. The village is a cluster of timber-framed cottages, their thatched roofs darkened by the night's dew. There is no clock to mark the hour, but the work begins long before the sun lifts above the horizon. For here, bread is not simply food, it is survival, ritual, and, quietly, the daily heart of community life. The baker's cottage is a humble building, set a little apart from the rest. Its thick stone walls and small windows are designed to keep in heat. If you stand close, you'll smell yesterday's wood smoke, a faint trace of yeast, and something deep and earthy, the promise of grain transformed. Inside, the air is thick with expectation. The fire, banked overnight, is coaxed back to life. Bundles of kindling crackle as they're added, carefully tended by hands that have done this every day and every season, for as long as memory allows. This is not a tale of famous names or dramatic battles. It's about the weight of routine, the grind of necessity, and the small choices that filled the days of people whose lives rarely made it into the history books. Baking bread in a medieval village is a process measured in patience, labor, and the whims of the natural world. No step can be rushed and no detail can be ignored. Grain is the true foundation and it is never taken for granted. The year's harvest is stored in communal bins. Each family allotted its share based on tradition, obligation, and sometimes negotiation. Most villagers rely on rye or barley. Wheat is a luxury for festivals or the tables of the wealthy. The grain is coarse, full of chaff and stray pebbles. Every morning, before anything else, it must be sifted and ground. There is no machine for this work. Instead, women and older children gather around a pair of heavy millstones, one set upon the other. It is hard, repetitive labor. Turn, scrape, lift, sift. The rhythm is meditative, the kind of dull repetition that marks much of rural life. Hands grow calloused, shoulders ache, but the work must be done. Occasionally, someone hums a tune, one of those half-songs whose origin is forgotten, its melody as old as the village itself. The flour at last is ready. It is mixed with water drawn from the communal well, a process that can be perilous if the well has gone stagnant or the rains have failed. Into the dough goes a small portion of yesterday's leaven, a living, bubbling mixture of flour and water, kept alive by wild yeast. There is a subtle art to this and much superstition. Some say a dough won't rise if there's an argument in the house, or if the baker's hands are cold, or if a storm is coming. There are no clocks here, only senses honed by repetition. The dough must be kneaded, pressed and folded until it is just so, springy, neither too wet nor too dry. Sometimes it tears or sticks or refuses to come together. When it's right, the baker sets it aside to rise, covering it with a cloth and placing it near the gentle warmth of the ovens. This first rising can take hours, and there's little to do but wait and watch, listening to the faint tick of fermenting bubbles. You might imagine this would be a time for rest, but there is always work to fill the silence. Someone is gathering, kindling. Someone else is sweeping the floor or tending to a child. The baker's life is a chain of small tasks, feeding animals, mending clothes, keeping a wary eye on the weather. Each one is essential, each one easily overlooked. There is a subtle tension to the morning. If the dough fails, the family will go hungry. If the fire burns too low, the oven will not be hot enough. If it burns too high, the bread will scorch. The oven itself is a communal structure, often shared by several families. Each has their appointed day and hour to use it, negotiated with care and, sometimes, quiet resentment. The baker must judge exactly when the oven is ready, a skill that can't be taught, only learned by trial, error, and the scars of past failures. Once the dough has risen, it is shaped into loaves, round and squat, heavy and dense compared to modern bread. Sometimes the top is marked with a cross, more for tradition than piety, though superstition runs deep here. The loaves are set on wooden boards dusted with flour or bran to prevent sticking. Meanwhile, the oven is prepared. This is a slow, deliberate process. The baker shovels hot coals into the domed chamber, closing the thick wooden door to trap the heat. When the bricks glow with stored energy, the coals are swept out and the loaves are placed inside, the door quickly shut behind them. There is no way to control the temperature except through instinct and experience. Some say a properly heated oven sings when the bread is put in, the steam hissing in a particular way. Now, finally comes another. Wait. The aroma of baking bread fills the air, drifting through the village. Children linger nearby, hoping for a scrap. Older villagers pause in their tasks, comforted by the familiar smell. But there is still risk. The bread can overbake or underbake or fall flat for reasons no one can explain. Sometimes a batch is ruined and must be fed to animals or crumbled into soup. When the loaves are finally drawn from the oven, their crusts dark and hard, there is a moment of quiet pride. The baker taps the bottom of each loaf, listening for the hollow sound that means it is done. The bread is left to cool on wooden racks, the day's work nearly complete. But the story is not yet finished. For the bread must last the week, sometimes longer. Each slice is carefully rationed, each crumb swept up and saved. Bread is the measure of life here. When it is plentiful, there is comfort. When it is scarce, fear lingers in every meal. You watch the baker wipe flour from her hands. A simple question lingers in the smoky air. How did this slow, steady ritual become the anchor of so many lives? And what hidden stories are baked into each crust and crumb? The hours pass slowly as the sun rises higher, gilding the thatch and turning the village lanes from silver to dusty gold. Smoke curls gently from the communal oven's chimney, a silent signal that today is a baking day. Life in the medieval village flows around this ritual, and bread, simple, brown, and sometimes sour, is the thread that ties every person together. Today, it's not only the baker's family who will eat. Neighbors will share the oven, and sometimes the loaves themselves. The oven stands at the village's edge, a round, low building with soot-blackened walls and a thick wooden door. Its massive stones hold heat for hours, making it precious and, for many, sacred. There are customs here. When you arrive, you greet the oven, you brush away any ashes left from another's use, and you pay quiet respect to the cycle of those who baked before you. Inside, the oven's heat is palpable, radiating from every brick. The baker works quickly, placing each loaf with a practiced flick of the wrist. There is little conversation. The rhythm of the morning is already set. Dough, shaped oven-heated loaves placed, the door shut fast. Only then does the baker rest, easing onto a bench outside with a sigh that carries the weight of centuries. But rest is never total. Children must be watched, kept from wandering too near the oven or from stealing a handful of cooling crust. A neighbor appears carrying a basket for her family's turn. A dog noses around, hopeful for scraps. The morning is filled with small tasks and smaller interactions. A nod, a shared story, an offer of salt or dried herbs. Bread is sustenance, but it is also social currency. If a neighbor's oven day has been missed, due to illness, injury, or bad luck, another family might offer a loaf, a small act of generosity that can ripple through a community. A birth, a death, a wedding, or a famine, all are marked by gifts of bread. Sometimes a loaf is left at a doorstep, its presence speaking of care and connection where words are scarce. Inside the baker's house, the pace is slower but never still. Someone is always tending to another chore, fetching water, repairing tools, stirring a pot of soup. The youngest children are given a crust to chew, their gums soothed by the hard bread. Elders sit by the fire, recounting stories of harvests, pastor warning of hard times ahead. The baker glances often at the sky, reading the weather, a skill as necessary as kneading dough. But the waiting is not idle. There are superstitions to be observed. In some villages, the oven is blessed with a sprig of rosemary or a whispered prayer. It's said that loaves will not rise if the baker is angry, or if the village is beset by ill fortune. Bread can be blamed for sickness too, if the grain was damp, if the flour was old, if mice found their way into the bins. This close connection between food and fate is woven deep into the fabric of life. A good bake is a blessing. A ruined one, an omen. When a loaf cracks or burns, the baker examines it closely, seeking patterns or signs. Some say a hollow loaf portends a death. A burst crust means a secret will be revealed. These beliefs, born of uncertainty and long winters, offer explanation where reason is scarce. As midday approaches, the first loaves are checked. The baker listens for that telling hollow knock and breathes in the scent, nutty, warm, edged with smoke. Loaves are set on racks to cool, each one watched closely for cracks or spoilage. There is no room for waste. Broken bread becomes thick porridge or is saved for soup. The best loaves are set aside for the next holy day, for a sick neighbor, or as rent for the manor lord. All the while, the baker's hands never truly rest. There's more flour to sift for tomorrow, more dough to mix and set aside to ferment overnight. If the baker is lucky, there might be a scrap of honey or a handful of nuts to knead into a special loaf, a rare luxury. Beyond the walls of the village, the fields stretch away, wheat, barley, rye, or sometimes just fallow land waiting for next year's hope. Each harvest is both a gamble and a communal effort. If the crop is good, bread will be plentiful. If not, hunger waits, silent and patient. By afternoon, the rhythm of the bakehouse has become the rhythm of the village. Children gather to wait for the first warm slice, their mouths watering in anticipation. Older villagers pause in the lane, offering blessings or gossip as they pass. The loaves, once cool, are divided according to custom, each family's share determined by need, status, and sometimes unspoken bargains. It's easy, looking back, to think of bread as merely food. But here, in the soft heat of the oven and the steady hands of the baker, bread is something deeper. It is survival, yes, but also memory. Of seasons past, of ancestors lost, of traditions handed down in silence and practice. Each loaf carries with it the labor of fields, the grind of stone, the warmth of the hearth, and the stubborn hope that tomorrow's bread will rise as well. Still, as the shadows lengthen and the oven's heat fades, a question remains. What happened when this delicate system, so reliant on weather, custom, and trust, was shaken by disaster? When war, famine, or disease came, how did the village adapt, and who bore the brunt of change? Evening draws a hush over the village as the sun slips behind the distant trees. The work of baking, though never quite finished, slows to a gentle rhythm. Fresh loaves cool on wooden racks, and the comforting aroma seeps into every thatched corner. Yet beneath the calm, an undercurrent of uncertainty lingers. A truth every villager understands. Bread is a fragile comfort, easily disrupted by forces far beyond their control. Disaster in a medieval village could arrive quietly or all at once. Perhaps a sudden blight withers the fields, or heavy rains ruin the grain stored in barns. A stray spark in the night could burn the communal oven to its foundations. More often, trouble comes in slow, relentless waves. A poor harvest, the slow encroachment of rodents, the rumor of war from a distant lord. Distant lord. When grain is scarce, every crumb becomes precious. Bread changes shape, growing smaller, rougher, more bitter as scraps of acorns, beans, or ground-up peas are mixed in to stretch the flour. Families gather in anxious silence, cutting thinner slices, boiling crusts into watery soup, scraping crumbs from the table to feed livestock or, if truly desperate, simply to fill a hollow stomach for one more night. Some hardships are met with adaptation. Old women remember recipes for survival bread, mixing flour with tree bark, nettles, or chestnuts, kneading dough with water from boiled roots. Children are sent into the woods to forage for anything edible, wild berries, mushrooms, or nuts. Even the poorest villagers know which weeds can be ground and baked in place of grain. Every meal is a calculation. Every loaf is a lesson in resilience. Communal bonds, so strong in times of plenty, are tested by hunger. A neighbor who once shared bread may now hide her last loaf. The lord of the manor, far removed from daily toil, may demand his share regardless of the villagers' suffering. Sometimes disputes arise over access to the oven, or accusations fly that someone is taking more than their due. Trust, so carefully built over years of shared baking, can unravel in a season of want. Yet, even in the hardest times, bread remains at the center of life. During plagues or wars, the ritual of baking offers structure, a reason to rise before dawn, to light the fire, to keep moving when grief or fear would paralyze. The simple act of kneading dough, of waiting for yeast to rise, becomes an act of hope and defiance. For some, it is also an act of faith. The church teaches that give us this day our daily bread is not only prayer but necessity. As famine tightens its grip, villages adapt. Those with extra grain may barter for labor, clothing, or even news from beyond the valley. Traveling merchants bring new techniques, a better oven design, a stronger grain, a different way of storing flour. News spreads slowly, but innovations sometimes catch on, offering a sliver of relief or efficiency. Still, the pace of change is glacial. For most, life is lived one loaf at a time, one day to the next. The bread itself tells stories of survival. In good years, loaves are large, soft, and golden. In bad years, they are dark, dense, and tough, barely holding together. Children grow up learning to distinguish good bread from bad, learning that a hard crust or a bitter crumb is a warning, a sign that next year might be harder still. For the elderly, each loaf brings memories of seasons past, of hunger survived, of festivals when bread overflowed, of loved ones lost to hunger or sickness. Through all these changes, the communal oven stands as a symbol of endurance. It is rebuilt if destroyed, tended even when cold. Its fire draws villagers together, whether to celebrate a wedding, to mourn a loss, or simply to mark another day survived. The act of baking is never just about food. It is about continuity, connection, and the stubborn will to persevere. Over time, as the centuries pass and new technologies arrive, mills powered by water, ovens made of brick, yeast cultivated with care, the old rhythms persist but shift. Bread becomes lighter, more varied, even a luxury for some, yet the memory of slow, day-long baking, of the weight of flour sacks and the crackle of burning wood, lingers in family stories, in half-remembered recipes, and in the scent of a warm loaf drawn from the oven. You, listening now, might wonder, how many loaves have vanished into the silence of history, their bakers unnamed, their stories untold? How many hands learned patience and hope at the edge of a smoky oven, shaping bread that meant more than food? And as you drift toward sleep, think of the bread you have eaten, the soft, the sour, the sweet, and the hard. Each is an echo of countless hours of ordinary people shaping their world one loaf at a time, facing uncertainty with hands steady from repetition and hearts stubborn with hope. In the end, perhaps the story of bread in the medieval village is not just about survival, but about the quiet persistence that keeps us all moving forward. Even when the night is long, the oven cold, and the next day's meal is far from certain. So, what other daily tasks, now nearly invisible, once shaped the lives and hopes of our ancestors, quietly binding them together through time? You awaken to the clang of a distant bell and the steady crunch of gravel underfoot. The air is sharp with the scent of earth, stone, and distant pine. It is the dawn of another long day on the outskirts of a Roman outpost, somewhere in the sprawl of the empire, a place you'd never find on a map, marked only by the meandering course of a half-finished road. There is nothing glamorous here, no togas or chariots, only the endless, repetitive labor of men with calloused hands and dust-caked faces. Roads are the veins of the empire, stretching from Hispania to Judea, Gaul to North Africa. But before, a single paving stone is laid, before the glory of a finished road is paraded by legionaries and merchants, there is the business of digging, spade after spade, day after day. And so you join the ranks of the fossers, the diggers, the unseen workforce of empire. The job begins with planning, but not the sort that brings glory. A Roman surveyor, or grammaticus, arrives at first light. He squints into the sun, setting his groma, a tool of plumb lines and crosspieces, at the appointed spot. The surveyor's job is to chart a straight course, regardless of hills, forests, or the grumbling of the workers. It is a task of geometry, but also stubbornness. Roman. Roads are famous for cutting through obstacles rather than around them. The surveyor marks the path with wooden stakes, his work done before the real labor begins. You and your companions gather in silence. Some are free laborers, earning coin or rations. Others are soldiers fulfilling duties that have little to do with battle. Some are enslaved, eyes wary, lips pressed thin. The sun is barely above the trees as the first shovel bites into the soil. There is no ceremony, only the relentless rhythm of digging, a movement as old as civilization itself. The earth is not always willing. In some places it is rich and dark, full of roots and stones. In others, it is clay that clings to the blade, or sand that shifts underfoot. Each kind of soil brings its own challenges and aches. Progress is measured in inches, then feet, then, if you are lucky, yards. Supervisors pace behind the line of diggers, their voices sharp and impatient, their wooden rods ready to urge anyone who slows. By midday, sweat runs in rivers down your back. The sun climbs, and the ground yields only grudgingly, The work is divided by skill and strength. The strongest men drive the first spades, breaking up the top layer. Others follow, clearing stones and tossing them aside. Behind them, teams with crude wooden carts or woven baskets haul the earth away, piling it in neat berms along the route. Each trench must reach a precise depth, measured by the foreman's stick. Too shallow, and the road will flood in the first rain. Too deep, and precious time is lost. Time the empire cannot spare. Lunch is a quick affair. A hunk of bread, a handful of olives, water from a battered leather skin. There is little talk. The noise of digging is constant, interrupted only by the barked commands of overseers or the clang of a spade striking hidden stone. Occasionally, the diggers unearth something unexpected, a pottery shard, a bit of bone, the rusted remains of an earlier settlement. These are set aside without comment, history discarded in favor of progress. To an outsider, the process seems endless and dull. Yet beneath the monotony there is a strange sense of order. Each worker has a role. The lines of the trench must be straight and true. Every load of soil removed brings the project closer to its goal, a solid bed, wide enough to support not just the road but the weight of armies and centuries. The work is brutal, but it is also essential, the backbone of Roman infrastructure. Occasionally an engineer inspects the progress. He is a figure of some authority, his tunic cleaner, his manner detached. He checks measurements, barks a few questions, and moves on. His interest is not in the sweat and blisters, but in the efficiency of the process, the alignment of the trench, the stability of the foundation. For the diggers, these inspections are moments of anxiety. A poorly cut trench can mean punishment or lost wages. As the day wanes, the trench grows deeper and the pile of earth beside it taller. Shadows lengthen and the work slows. Backs ache, hands bleed, and tempers fray. Still, there is pride in a day's work done well. A trench dug straight and true, ready for the next phase. The diggers know their labor is the first step in something larger, even if their names will not be remembered. Yet, as the firelight flickers in the workers' camp, questions remain. How did the Romans sustain this relentless push for roads, mile after mile, year after year? What happened when the landscape itself fought back, or when the workforce rebelled against monotony and hardship? And who, in the end, truly benefited from this vast network of roads? Those who ordered them, those who traveled them, or those whose lives were spent in their making? Dawn returns, pale and relentless, illuminating the unfinished trench like a wound across the land. The first day's labor is etched into your bones, but the work resumes with the same steady rhythm. The Roman road is not a simple track. It is a layered system, a feat of quiet engineering that requires planning, precision, and above all, stamina. As you take your place along the trench, the process becomes almost ritual, a choreography of sweat and stubbornness that will outlast your own memory. The supervisors arrive before sunrise, carrying their measuring sticks and the plans inscribed on wax tablets. The route has already been determined, marked by stakes and cords stretching in an unyielding line through whatever stands in the way: meadows, woods, even ancient burial grounds. The empire favors straightness, but nature rarely cooperates. Where the land dips into a bog or rises in rocky hills, the engineers improvise. The solution is always labor. Dig deeper, pile higher, move earth, until it conforms to Roman will. Today's work focuses on depth and structure. The initial trench is made wider at the bottom than the top, a subtle but crucial detail. This prevents the sides from collapsing and ensures a stable foundation. The diggers move in teams, some breaking new ground, others smoothing and compacting the base. A few unlucky souls are assigned to drainage ditches, which must run parallel to the main trench, an unglamorous but vital task, for standing water is the enemy of any road. Stone is brought in from nearby quarries, delivered in creaking carts or carried in baskets on bent backs. The largest and roughest stones are laid first, forming a solid underlayer called the statumen. Each stone is carefully positioned, gaps filled with smaller fragments, creating a surface that resists shifting. It's back-breaking, repetitive labor. Stoop, lift, place, repeat. The rhythm is hypnotic, the progress visible only in the slow extension of the stony ribbon across the landscape. Above the statumen comes the rudis, a mix of crushed stone, gravel, and lime. Workers with wooden mallets and rakes spread and compact this layer, sweating in the dust. Water is sometimes sprinkled over the surface to settle the material. The process is dusty and monotonous, punctuated by sharp commands and the occasional groan as a cart tips or a stone slips. Every layer must be perfectly level. A crooked roadbed can spell disaster when the rains come or when the legions march. Next, the nucleus, a finer mix of sand, gravel, and sometimes clay, is poured in. This is tamped smooth, a task requiring patience and teamwork. The engineers check and recheck the gradient, adjusting as needed to ensure water will run off rather than pool. Mistakes here can doom the entire road. Over time, a trained eye develops, a sense for the proper density, the right firmness underfoot, the subtle slope that means drainage is working. As the sun climbs, a few skilled laborers prepare the summum dorsum, the top surface. In major roads, this might be large paving stones painstakingly shaped to fit together like a puzzle. On lesser roads, it could be compacted gravel. The paving stones, quarried miles away, are set by hand, adjusted until they interlock, their surfaces smoothed by years of passage. This is the only part of the road most travelers will see, but you know the countless hours buried beneath each footstep. Throughout the day, engineers pass up and down the line, checking levels with their chroma and chorobates, recording progress on wax tablets. The overseers are less forgiving, reminding everyone that pay is tied to pace, that supplies are finite, that the empire waits for no man's delay. Punishments for shoddy work are swift, sometimes brutal: lost wages, extra shifts, or, in the worst cases, public lashes. Yet despite the hardships, the road crew develops a camaraderie. Meals are shared, jokes whispered over the clatter of stone. Men swap stories of other roads, some boasting of miles completed, others muttering about supervisors worse than these. A soldier remembers marching on a road he now helps build. Former farmer grieves for the field that vanished beneath the stones. The road is a meeting place of fates, free and enslaved, local and foreign, all bound together by the demands of empire. Not all tasks are equal, nor are all laborers. Skilled stonemasons command more respect and a few more coins than ordinary diggers. Some workers are conscripted, pressed into service by local officials. Others are prisoners of war, working off a sentence measured in leagues of completed a road. For the enslaved, there is no end but exhaustion. For everyone else, there is only the hope that the next stretch will be easier, the next overseer more forgiving, the next meal a little less meager. As the sun dips toward the horizon, the trench now looks less like a wound and more like the skeleton of a great beast, layer upon layer, rising with slow inevitability. The work will continue for weeks, months, sometimes years. Each day is much the same, yet each is unique. A change in soil, an unexpected flood, a stone that will not fit. These are not the stories that make it into the chronicles, but they are the bones of history, the invisible labor beneath every triumphal arch and imperial milestone. Still, questions linger as you shoulder your spade for another day. How did the Roman road builders manage the constant challenge of nature? Floods, landslides, shifting ground? What happened when a project stalled, when supplies ran out, or when the workforce rebelled against the burden of endless toil? And in the end, who preserved the memory of these builders, whose sweat is buried beneath every stone, when only the roads themselves endured? Night falls over the half-built road, and the laborers gather around dim campfires. Tomorrow will bring more digging, more hauling, more stones carefully fitted into the ground. But for a moment, in the hush between shifts, you can almost believe the road itself is alive, a ribbon of potential, waiting for centuries of travelers yet to come. Yet even Roman order cannot always conquer the unpredictability of earth and weather. Some mornings bring disaster. A night's rain has turned the trench into a sucking mire, or a hillside collapses in a heap of mud and stone. Digging out and rebuilding takes days, sometimes weeks. Sometimes the tools are lost, or the oxen fall, sick or a laborer is hurt and carted away, never to return. These setbacks are not rare. They are the heartbeat of the project, the moments no triumphal inscription will ever mention. Engineers and overseers adapt with a grim sort of ingenuity. Drainage ditches are widened, retaining walls built from whatever stone is nearest. In mountainous country, whole armies are set to carving ledges out of the living rock, their work echoing down the valleys with each hammer blow. In marshy lowlands, bundles of brush and layers of sand are used to stabilize the ground, a fragile solution, but one that sometimes endures. No solution is perfect, and every choice means more labor, more sweat, more time lost to the inexorable march of seasons. Supplies, too, are a constant concern. Stone must be quarried and carted, lime fired, wood gathered for scaffolds and fires. If a supply line falters, work grinds to a halt. Rumors spread quickly. A delayed shipment, a corrupt official hoarding grain, a tax collector demanding more than his due. For those paid by the day or by the foot of road completed, delays mean hunger. For enslaved workers and prisoners, it simply means the days of labor stretch on, uncertain and endless. There are moments of rebellion and unrest. Some laborers slip away at night, vanishing into forests or distant villages. Sometimes a project is stalled for weeks by protests, injuries, or outright refusal to continue. Roman law is harsh, and the punishments for insubordination are swift. Fines, flogging, forced conscription. Even so, stories persist of work crews who sabotage their own progress, of roads left unfinished for decades, only to be resumed by new generations with new ambitions. And then there are the personal losses, the men and boys who die on the job, buried in shallow graves beside the road or carried home on crude litters if their families are nearby. Their names are rarely recorded, their passing marked only by a quiet pause in the rhythm of work. A comrade mutters a prayer, a tool is passed on, and the digging resumes. In time, grass grows over the grave, and the road moves on. Yet when the road is finally finished, when the last paving stone is set, the last trench filled, the last supervisor departs, there is a quiet satisfaction among the laborers. They may never travel this road again, may never see the distant cities it connects, but they know their mark is set into the bones of the land. For centuries, their trench will bear the weight of legions and merchants, pilgrims and thieves, the wheels of empire rolling ceaselessly overhead. Centuries later, as the empire fades and crumbles, the roads endure. Some are swallowed by forest or broken by flood, but many survive. Travelers walk their straight lines, marvel at their solidity, and wonder at the anonymous hands that built them. Archaeologists, centuries removed from sweat and mud, brush away soil and find the layers. Statumen, rudis, nucleus, paving stones, testament to the method and order that once ruled half the world. But little is left of the diggers themselves. Their names lost, their tools rusted, their stories scattered in half-remembered tales and the occasional scratched mark on a stone. Yet in the faint echo of a shovel's ring, in the stubborn straightness of an ancient roadbed visible from the sky, their presence endures. You, lying awake in the present, might find yourself pondering. Is there dignity in work that leaves no name, only a trace in the earth? Does the endurance of a road matter more than the lives spent building it? Or is it the quiet persistence of ordinary labor that truly shapes history? And as you drift towards sleep, you might ask, what other acts of endurance, now invisible, have built the world we walk each day, layer by layer, stone by stone, stone by stone? Imagine yourself waking before sunrise, dew beating on the grass, the air thick with the scent of earth and cut hay. In the distance, a cock crows, a sound as old as land itself. You stand at the edge of a field, rough boots sinking into soft mud, a heavy coil of chain weighing down your shoulder, a bundle of stakes clutched in your fist. Your job today is not to farm or to build, but to measure, to turn the shifting, uncertain boundaries of land into lines that can be seen, argued over, taxed, inherited, or lost. This is not the dramatic side of history. No kings or knights will ride out to watch you. Your companions are not soldiers, but other surveyors, village elders, sometimes a suspicious landowner or a scribe with his ledger. You will not leave monuments, only the faint marks of stakes driven into the ground. Perhaps a chalk line on a stone. Perhaps just a memory of where the line once lay. But for all its invisibility, land measurement is a quietly vital craft. It is the engine that powers taxation, inheritance, and peace. It is the sleepy, essential science that shapes who owns what and how much. In a world before satellite imagery, the task depends on two things: the patience of men and the persistence of tools. Today, your main instrument is the measuring chain, sometimes called a Gunter's chain, sometimes just the chain. It is a length of iron links, standardized in some places, wildly inconsistent in others. One end is pegged at a starting point agreed upon by all. The chain crew stretches it taut, counting paces, muttering numbers under their breath. Each link has been forged and counted. Each pace has been practiced until it fits the stride of the men who use it. The work is monotonous, its pace set by the slow, regular placing of one foot in front of the other. Every so often, you drive a wooden stake into the ground to mark the measurement. Sometimes, you drop a small stone or notch a tree. If the ground is uneven, the chain must be lifted and sighted as level as possible, a task requiring both practice and trust. Mistakes can mean disputes, even violence. A crooked line might mean the difference between a family's livelihood and hunger. The work is rarely solitary. Villagers gather to watch, their faces wary, arms folded. Landowners hover at the edges, sometimes arguing, sometimes silent with calculation. The surveyor, often an outsider, is paid to be impartial, but rarely trusted. His chain is checked, his stakes counted. A scribe records each number, translating the slow progress across the field into cramped lines in a ledger. Behind every number is a story of marriages, feuds, crop failures, inheritances. Every acre has a memory, every boundary a history of arguments and uneasy truces. On some days, the measuring is straightforward, a long rectangle of open ground bordered by hedges or ancient walls. On others, it is a tangle of irregular fields, winding streams, or woods where the line disappears among the trees. Then the surveyors must improvise, sighting along the edge of a thicket, measuring around boulders, sometimes crossing into land claimed by another. Arguments flare up, tempers rise. The measuring stops until an agreement is reached or until force or bribes settle the question. The measuring stick, a staff or rod, sometimes carved with marks for length, is used to double-check shorter distances or to bridge the gaps where the chain cannot lie flat. In the oldest days, these rods are simple branches, cut to an agreed-upon length and replaced as they wear out. Later, they are standardized and marked in feet, yards, or rods, another small advance in the slow, boring march of precision. Midday finds the measuring crew paused in the shade, chewing rough bread and onions, sipping sour ale. There is little to discuss. The work is not intellectually demanding, but it is tiring. Backs ache, hands blister, and dust cakes every surface. The scribe re-inks his pen, reviewing the numbers, watching for errors. The landowners and elders grumble about old grievances, compare the new measurements to stories told by fathers and grandfathers. Boundaries are rarely fixed. They drift with memory, with weather, with the ambitions of those who stand to gain or lose. Sometimes you find traces of earlier boundaries, an ancient stone sunk into the earth, a ruined wall now hidden by brambles, a tree with a mark long since faded. These relics are silent witnesses to generations of measurement and dispute. The past presses up through the soil, reminding everyone that today's numbers are just another layer in the ongoing palimpsest of the land. As the sun begins to set, the final chain is stretched, the last stake hammered home. The field is measured, its dimensions set down in the ledger. The surveyors gather their tools, the scribe dusts off his records, and the villagers drift away, each carrying the knowledge of the new boundary, whether in satisfaction or silent resentment. But as you shoulder your chain and walk home through the gathering dusk, you might wonder, how did these fragile lines, marked by chains and sticks, become the bedrock of law and society? And what happened when memory clashed with measurement? When the land itself refused to conform to numbers and straight lines? What secrets lie beneath these boundaries, drawn and redrawn over centuries, forgotten by all but the stubborn stones and silent fields? Morning returns, and with it the long shadow of the surveyor, chain glinting as he moves through the fields. By now the village is abuzz with murmurs. Whose land has grown? Whose has shrunk? Whose boundaries have been questioned? You step into the dew-soaked grass, chain and stick at the ready, already knowing the day will hold less measuring and more negotiating. For while numbers may seem impartial, the reality of land measurement in the medieval and early modern world is anything but simple. No one entirely trusts the result. Old men recall the day years back when a chain stretched in the heat and gave a neighbor 2 extra rods of barley land. Others remember a season of hunger blamed on a boundary dispute, when a row over a strip of pasture left hay uncut and tempers frayed for a whole winter. Every measurement is contested, every stake a potential spark for trouble. You find yourself standing with the surveyor and scribe as 2 families argue at the meeting point of 3 fields. The line you drew yesterday is in question. Someone claims the hedge is newer than it seems. Another swears their grandfather's stories prove the land runs further east. Voices rise, and the scribe busily scratches notes, hoping to record what is said but not to take sides. A local priest is summoned. His word holds weight, but his memory is as much folklore as fact. Disputes like these are common. Some are resolved quietly. A handshake, a drink shared at the tavern, an extra row of cabbages planted as a peace offering. Others linger for years, finding their way into parish records, lawsuits, even violence. The smallest stream or boundary stone becomes the subject of solemn oaths and bitter accusations. The chain, meant as a symbol of fairness, can just as easily become a tool of injustice if wielded with bias or carelessness. Beyond the village, larger landowners and noble estates hire their own surveyors, sometimes traveling for miles with teams of assistants and elaborate instruments. Here measurement becomes almost theatrical. Great lengths of chain are laid out, men stand on distant hills waving flags, and complicated calculations fill heavy ledgers. The results carry more weight in court, and deeds, parchment documents inscribed with seals and signatures, begin to replace memory as the currency of proof. This shift from oral tradition to written record marks a quiet revolution. Once a field was defined by how far a man could walk before his lunch cooled, or by the oak tree where children played. Now it is described by numbers and coordinates, by surveys and official maps. This offers a kind of protection. A deed can be produced in court, a measurement repeated by any competent hand. But it also means that errors become enshrined in law and injustices can linger for generations. Measurement tools, too, become more sophisticated. Wooden rods give way to iron chains, and by the 17th century the Gunter's chain, a precise 66 feet long, standardizes acreage across much of England and its colonies. Surveyors learn to read the lay of the land, to correct for hills and hollows, to mark corners with carved stones or stacks of turf. The work is still slow and tiring, but it is now tinged with the authority of science. Still, the land resists. Streams shift their courses after floods. Trees are struck by lightning or chopped for firewood, erasing boundary marks. Fields are plowed under, new hedges grown. Generations pass, memories fade, and the ledger grows thicker with annotations, corrections, and marginal notes. The certainty of the chain is always a little less than it seems. Surveyors develop a certain temperament, patient, discreet, good with numbers and with people. Their job is to see without being seen, to record what is there, not what people wish was there. Many are outsiders, wandering from parish to parish, their faces known but not entirely trusted. Some keep secret notes, marking oddities or errors, unsure if they'll ever be called upon to defend their work in court. Deeds pile up in the manor house and the church vestry. Some are copied, others lost to mice and mildew. The law, slow as it is, grinds on. Cases are heard, judgments handed down, land exchanged, families ruined or enriched. Behind every case is a field measured in chains and rods, its true history more complicated than any record can tell. And so as another day of measuring ends, you might wonder, did all this effort at accuracy bring more justice, or simply new ways to argue and cheat? When the chain stretches or the ledger is lost, who gets to decide what is truly fair? And, if every line on the map is really a story, whose stories were preserved and whose were left to fade in the margins? What finally is the true shape of the land, and who holds the power to draw its borders? Evening settles once more on the village. The measuring chain is coiled, the ledger shut, and the last stake left as a silent marker in the field. For a day, perhaps a week, there is an uneasy calm. Boundaries have been set, disputes settled or set aside, and life resumes its slow, repetitive rhythm. But as dusk gives way to night, it becomes clear that the work of measuring land is never truly finished. Time moves forward, but land remembers. Fields change hands, through sale, inheritance, or sometimes the slow erosion of a family line. A son inherits a plot whose dimensions are just numbers on a brittle deed. He may never know where the boundary truly lay, or why the chain was stretched just so on that foggy morning. The oak tree that once marked the edge of the field is felled for firewood. The stream shifts course in a violent spring thaw, eating away the bank and shifting the line, ever so slightly, with each flood. Mistakes made by surveyors, accidental, or otherwise, are passed down embedded in deeds and ledgers, unchallenged until a future generation is forced to care. Sometimes these errors are discovered only centuries later, when a field is mapped for the first time with a theodolite, or when a railway company wants to buy the land and must untangle centuries of confusion. An old man may appear before a magistrate, clutching a yellowed deed and swearing that his great-grandfather's orchard once stretched to the far hedge, though no one can remember for certain. The slow creep of bureaucracy adds another layer. As kingdoms centralize power, land registration becomes more formal. Maps are drawn, filed, and eventually printed. But even these are snapshots, best guesses, drawn from a chain dragged through mud and a stick laid over stones that may have shifted in the night. Some maps show ghost fields that never truly existed or record a lost acre, now a patch of woodland or a strip of riverbank. The land keeps its secrets, even as paper records multiply. And then there is memory, the greatest rival of measurement. Stories are told at winter fires, how a clever ancestor moved a boundary stone under cover of darkness, or how a feud with a neighbor led to a fistfight at the far corner of the barley field. Some families keep a handful of dirt from the true corner of their land, passing it down as proof when all else is forgotten. Every field is a palimpsest, a layering of old arguments, secret agreements, and vanished landmarks. Through it all, the surveyor's work, so careful, so precise in its moment, fades into the background. Few remember the men who walked the fields, counted links, and wrote numbers in neat columns. Their legacy is not in grand monuments, but in the unnoticed order of daily life. Who plants which furrow? Who gathers which harvest? Who claims what, at death or wedding? They are custodians of a kind of quiet inheritance, one measured in feet and rods, but felt most keenly in the certainty, or uncertainty, of home. As the centuries pass, new tools arise. Chains are replaced by steel tapes, then by transits, then by satellites and digital surveys from far above the clouds. The boundaries become sharper, but the old ghosts linger. Lawsuits erupt over a few feet of disputed land. Archaeologists uncover ancient field systems, their lines long erased from memory and map. Sometimes a modern survey matches the ancient measurements almost perfectly. Other times it reveals the drift of centuries, a history written in crooked hedgerows, sunken lanes, and the subtle shift of furrows. Still, every measurement, no matter how accurate, is ultimately an act of faith. The true shape of the land is always more complicated than any map or ledger can show. It is a negotiation between memory and math, between nature and need, between past and present. Tonight, as you lie in the dark, you might ask, how much of your world is shaped by boundaries set by someone long forgotten, with a chain and a stick and a careful eye for the horizon? How many of your certainties are just agreements layered atop ancient arguments, fragile as a wooden stake left in a field? And what, if anything, endures after the chain is wound? The stick is broken and the line between mine and yours has faded into the quiet, patient earth. Before the sun touches the horizon, before the cocks crow or the bells chime, from the village church a figure is already awake and moving through the darkness. You are the village washwoman, a role older than memory and inherited not through glory, but necessity. Your days begin earlier and end later than most, and each one follows the same humble grinding pattern. Your hands are raw from winter's cold and summer's work, nails rimmed with permanent stains of lye, clay, and mud. The laundry of the entire village rests in woven baskets at your door. Rough tunics, stained shifts, children's stockings, the Lord's linens, the priest's altar cloth. Each pile is a story of daily life, of spilled stew, of mended hems, of illness, birth, or grief. Some stains are stubborn secrets, others are as familiar as your own face in the river's morning reflection. Work begins with water, always water. You lift your pail, heavy, rough, and leaking a little at the seam, and make your way to the communal well. The path is rutted, sometimes icy, and the journey is often repeated many times before the day is done. If you're lucky, the well is full and sweet. If not, you trudge further, to the muddy edge of the stream, hoping for a clean spot among the rushes. The cold bites your hands as you dip and fill again and again. In spring, frogs leap away from your shadow. In winter, your breath steams and the pail must be broken free from a skin of ice. This ritual, fetching, pouring, carrying, is the first act of the washwoman's quiet labor, and it is felt in every ache and twinge. Next comes the sorting. There is an order, determined by both custom and practicality. The priest's whites, the Lord's linens, then the everyday garments of the villagers. The filthiest rags, and those soiled by illness, are kept separate, sometimes set aside for boiling. The finest cloth is handled first and with the most care. You inspect each piece, finding secret tears to be mended, lost pins to be returned, the occasional coin hidden in a hem. Every item tells a silent story, and every story is folded into your routine. Washing in these days is no gentle affair. There are no soaps or powders, only homemade lye, harsh, caustic, made by dripping water through wood ash. You stir the lye into a tub, feeling it burn your chapped hands. The linens are beaten on flat stones at the river's edge, pounded with wooden paddles, then rinsed again and again until the water runs clearer. Sometimes you use handfuls of clay or sand as a scrub, scouring away stubborn stains. The river is your workshop. At first light, you join other women at its banks, each with her own rhythm, her own pile of washing, her own burdens and whispered stories. Conversation is low and practical, news of a neighbor's illness, the price of bread, the approach of tax collectors. Children might play at the water's edge, their laughter bright against the slap of cloth on stone. Through the morning, the work continues. Backs bend, arms ache, knuckles split and bleed. Still, there are moments of contentment, a patch of sun on your shoulders, the satisfaction of a sheet turning white, the easy silence among women who have done this all their lives. Once in a while, a fish flashes past in the river, or a kingfisher skims over the surface, bright as a coin. These are small gifts, reminders of beauty and routine. By midday, the baskets are lighter, but your body is heavy with fatigue. The wet linen is bundled and slung over your shoulder, or laid in a handcart if you are lucky. The trek home is a slow one, up the muddy lane with the sun now warm and the first smells of midday cooking drifting from cottage chimneys. But as you walk, you think ahead, drying, mending, folding, more work yet to be done. You might wonder as you pass the busy heart of the village, how this labor, so essential, so invisible, shapes not just your days but the rhythm of the whole community. How many lives depend on your hands? How many secrets and burdens do you carry unnoticed and unremarked with each piece of cloth you scrub clean? And in a world where nearly everything is marked by hierarchy and pride, what place is there for the humble art of laundry, the work that never ends and yet is never quite finished? Midday in the village brings a shifting of labor, a pause only, long enough to swallow a crust of bread or offer a tired smile to another passing washerwoman. The heavy baskets of wet linen are home at last. Your back throbs with the effort, your arms tremble from hours at the river, but the day is nowhere near done. Now comes the delicate business of drying, starching, and mending, tasks that require not strength but patience, skill, and the quiet kind of attention that holds a community together. The village green or any patch of clean grass becomes your laundry's open-air drying room. You shake out each sheet and tunic, laying them over bushes or threading them along ropes strung between posts. If the weather is fine, the sun bakes, the damp from the linen. If not, you work quickly, chasing the sun's angle or shifting the lines to dodge a sudden cloud. In winter, the cloth sometimes freezes on the line, a testament to your perseverance as you rub warmth into your hands and pray for wind. Children dart around the drying sheets playing hide-and-seek, while the more helpful ones weigh down corners with stones or run errands between cottages. Sometimes a curious goat or chicken strays too close, threatening to undo your careful work, and you must shoo them away with a practiced cluck of the tongue. These moments, filled with laughter, shouts, small disasters, become part of the fabric of daily life, woven as tightly as any hem. You turn next to the mending basket, a jumble of torn seams, missing buttons, and worn cuffs. Sitting by the window or on a sunny stoop, you pick up a needle and thread, tools as familiar to you as your own hands. Some repairs are simple: a rip sewn shut, a button replaced, a patch set over a thinning elbow. Others require more patience: darning socks, reworking lace, turning a collar so it might last another season. Each stitch is a small act of care, restoring dignity and usefulness to things worn thin by work and time. As you mend, stories flow around you. Another washerwoman passes, sharing news of a difficult birth or a feast to come. A neighbor's child lingers, shyly watching your quick fingers, perhaps hoping to learn a trick or two. Sometimes a customer stops by, asking after a lost handkerchief or the progress on a favorite shirt. You listen, nod, offer a word or two. You are a keeper of confidences, a witness to the quiet details that mark the days. For the Lord's household or the priest's altar, laundry is more ceremonial. Fine linens are sprinkled with water and pressed smooth with a heavy slug iron, heated at the hearth. If you are especially skilled, you know the secret of starch, made from boiled wheat or potatoes, to stiffen collars and cuffs. The best pieces are folded carefully, wrapped in clean cloth, and returned with a small respectful nod. Payment is often modest: a few coins, a hunk of cheese, a promise of wood for winter. Yet your reputation depends on these tasks done well. Drying takes hours, sometimes all day. You keep watch for sudden weather, ever alert to the first rumble of thunder or the scatter of raindrops. When a shower threatens, you and your helpers run out, arms full, gathering what you can before the rain soaks through. Sometimes you lose the race, and a whole day's work must be repeated. Cloth hung by the hearth, shirts draped over chairs, the cottage air thick with steam and the sour smell of damp. Laundry is, in its way, a communal act. There is comfort in the routine, the shared grumbling about sore backs, the quiet pride when a difficult stain is conquered, the knowing looks exchanged with those who understand this world of stains and seams. The work knits you into the fabric of the village, as essential as the baker, the blacksmith, or the midwife. There are small satisfactions: the gleam of a spotless altar cloth, the weight of a newly mended shirt, the rows of clean linen fluttering like white banners in the breeze. These moments, brief as they are, bring a sense of order to an unpredictable world. They are reminders that even the humblest labor has its own dignity, its own beauty. Yet as dusk approaches and you gather the last dry sheets from the line, you can't help but wonder, what happens to all this unseen labor when illness sweeps through the village or war brings new burdens? Who will care for the laundry then, and how will the rhythms of washing and mending shift in times of hardship? And when your hands finally grow too tired, who will pick up the basket, shoulder the pail, and continue the work that seems to have no true beginning or end? As twilight descends, a hush settles on the village. The last of the linen has been gathered, folded, and sorted, Damp rags hang by the hearth, and the heavy wooden door is bolted against the chill. But your work is not truly finished. Not tonight. Not ever. There is always a stain that lingers, a sock that needs darning, a shirt promised for morning. The rhythm of the washwoman's day loops endlessly, echoing through weeks and years. But not every evening is peaceful. There are seasons when hardship darkens every doorstep, when illness sweeps through the cottages and the very laundry itself becomes a silent battleground. In times of plague or fever, soiled cloth is both a necessity and a danger. The baskets at your door are heavier, full of bedding from sick rooms, shirts streaked with blood or bile, linens reeking with the acrid scent of fear. There are whispered warnings about miasma and evil spirits. But you know, with a washerwoman's practicality, that filth itself breeds sickness. You boil water until your arms ache, stirring lye with increasing caution. The riverbank, usually busy with chatter and laughter, grows silent. Sometimes you work alone, your only company the splash of water and the wheeze of your own breath. You tie a cloth around your mouth and nose, scrub your hands raw, and burn what cannot be saved. The women who once gathered with you at the water's edge may be lost to sickness, or may simply stay away, fearing what your labor brings home. If you fall ill, there is little mercy. Others must take up your work, or the pile of laundry will overwhelm every cottage. Sometimes a daughter or niece shoulders the burden, her movements unsure but willing. Sometimes a neighbor lends a hand out of kindness, or simply out of fear that the whole village will suffer if the laundry is left undone. In these hard times, laundry is no longer invisible. It is the front line of the struggle for health, dignity, and survival. Change, too, comes from outside the village. A new lord arrives with ideas about cleanliness, bringing strange soaps, or insisting on more frequent washings for his household. Sometimes there is talk of new techniques: imported alum to bleach linen, imported indigo to dye it, new irons that smooth and stiffen with half the effort. These advances are slow to reach the poorest villagers, but every generation brings some small improvement, some shift in routine. Yet much remains the same. Old stains persist, passed down from garment to garment. Stories, too, are handed on, of floods that swept away the green and forced you to dry laundry in smoky attics, of fires that destroyed half the linens in the village, of years so cold that nothing dried for weeks. Each tale is a record of adaptation, endurance, and the small pride of a job done well. When you are old, your hands gnarled and your eyesight failing, you still hear the slap of wet cloth on stone in your dreams. Perhaps you have taught a daughter, or a neighbor's child, the secrets of the riverbank. Which clay scrubs best, which corner of the green catches the morning sun, which stains must be boiled, and which can be coaxed out with patience. You have left no monument but your knowledge, no mark but the comfort of clean sheets and mended seams. The village continues to turn, season by season. Wars come and go, lords rise and fall, but the laundry is always there, a quiet, essential labor, shaping the health and dignity of every home. Few will remember your name, but all will feel your work in the smoothness of a pillow, the cleanliness of a wound, the warmth of a winter shift. You are part of the invisible web that binds the community, a keeper of order in a world forever tilting toward chaos. As you drift into sleep, the ache of labor fading for a few short hours, you might wonder, what is the worth of a lifetime spent in quiet service, of tasks done over and over with no promise of recognition? Is the comfort you've brought to others a legacy, or will it vanish like soap bubbles on the river's surface? And as the next day dawns and the basket fills again, you understand, perhaps better than anyone, that the rhythms of washing, mending, and caring are as enduring as the village itself, passed from hand to hand, echoing on long after the last stain is scrubbed away. Long before sunlight streams through the stained glass and warms the chill stone floor, the monastery is already stirring. The bell's low toll echoes through vaulted corridors, calling monks to prayer, to silence, to the habits that define every waking hour. Among them moves the scribe, a figure as anonymous as the lines he copies. His days ruled not by adventure or intrigue, but by the slow, steady tick of ink upon parchment. You might imagine that the life of a scribe is tranquil, sheltered from the hardships that beset peasants and soldiers alike. But the reality is one of patient endurance, repetitive strain, and the invisible burdens of accuracy. The work begins in the dark, often by candlelight, with the ritual preparation of tools. The scribe's quill, a single, carefully trimmed feather, must be sharpened to a fine point. The ink, mixed from soot or oak galls, must be neither too thick nor too watery. The parchment, scraped sheepskin, must be smoothed and stretched, every blemish noted, every rough spot avoided. Your first task always is prayer. Even the act of copying a text is framed as devotion. Each letter, each flourish, is offered to God. In the scriptorium, where benches line the walls and every seat has a low desk and a narrow window, silence is the rule. Only the faint scratch of quill on skin, the sigh of turning pages, or the shuffle of sand to dry ink breaks the hush. The work itself is slow, methodical. The day's assignment might be a single page of scripture, a new chapter in the Rule of St. Benedict, or the careful illumination of a saint's initial. The text is chosen by the abbot, and errors are not easily forgiven. Some manuscripts are copied directly from an exemplar, a battered book held together by thread and faith. Others are dictated aloud, one monk reading while a row of scribes works in tandem, each racing to keep up, eyes flicking. From voice to page, from word to meaning. Distractions are many. Your bench is hard, your back aches, the light is fickle, too dim in winter, too glaring in summer. Flies and dust are constant enemies, as is fatigue. Hours pass, broken only by the call to prayer, a midday meal of bread and broth, or the brief rest in the cloistered garden. You stretch cramped fingers, flex a stiff neck, and return to the unending line of text. Mistakes, inevitable in any human enterprise, must be corrected with care. A slip of the quill means scraping away the ink, waiting for the spot to dry and writing again. Too many errors and the page is set aside, destined for the kindling pile. Yet some mistakes are immortalized, copied forward by others, their small imperfections a reminder that even holy work is never truly perfect. For those scribes tasked with illumination, there is a brief respite from monotony. Mixing colors from rare minerals and plants, gold leaf pressed onto the page, careful designs of vines and beasts curling in the margins. These are moments of creativity in a life defined by repetition. But even here, patience is key. The brush must be steady, the lines precise. Illumination is costly, reserved for the most precious books, and even a small error can ruin weeks of work. By midday, the scriptorium is warm with the press of bodies and the glow of light. Pages dry in rows, ink shining as it catches the sun. The master scribe inspects the work, offering a nod for well-formed letters, a frown for any sign of haste or sloppiness. Each page completed is stacked with others, weighted with stones to keep them flat, awaiting the binding that will turn loose leaves into a book. Yet the work is not merely mechanical. Every line copied, every word transcribed, is a thread in the tapestry of knowledge that stretches across centuries. The scribe knows that his labor, though tedious, is essential, the bridge that carries stories, prayers, and wisdom from the past into the future. As the sun dips toward the horizon, your hands are stained with ink, your mind dulled by repetition. Still you press on, knowing tomorrow will bring another page, another prayer, another line to bridge the ages. You may wonder, what happens when a scribe falters, when fatigue overcomes faith, when the weight of words becomes too much to bear, and, in the quiet of the evening, as you lay aside your tools and join the brethren in song, you might ask, how many stories, how much knowledge, have been lost to simple error, to carelessness, or to the silence that follows when the ink runs dry? Dusk settles on the scriptorium, but the labor of the scribe lingers, sometimes late into the evening, sometimes long after the others have retired to prayer or sleep. There is always another page to copy, another line to illuminate, another correction to make. The task is endless, the pressure immense, but its reward is rarely glory. More often it is the quiet satisfaction of a job done carefully, the fleeting moment of pride when a finished page is set aside. Still, the threat of error looms over every scribe. It is not only fatigue that haunts you, but the knowledge that each slip of the quill can echo for centuries. A single wrong letter in a holy text might change doctrine, spark a debate, or mark a scribe as careless in the margin notes of another generation. The rule of Saint Benedict is clear. Idleness is the enemy of the soul. But in the scriptorium, even diligence can fail in the face of tedium. Some errors are harmless, a letter transposed, a word repeated. These are scraped away with a sharp knife, sanded smooth, and covered over. Others run deeper. Entire lines can be omitted, whole passages misplaced. Once, a distracted scribe might skip a prayer or add his own flourish, and no one would notice until years later. Then there are the stories, half legend, half truth, of scribes so overwhelmed by the monotony that they hid jokes or tiny illustrations in the margins. A dancing mouse, a hooded snail, a comment on the abbot's lack of hair. The greater burden, though, is memory, not just your own, but the memory of the monastery, the accumulation of knowledge stored in shelves of parchment. You are both copyist and guardian, tasked with preserving the stories, laws, and wisdom that hold the community together. The monastery's library is its heart, a chilly room lined with books chained to the shelves, each one precious, some so rare that a single lost leaf is mourned like a death. Mistakes in copying are carefully recorded. Some scribes initial their work, hoping for forgiveness in posterity's eyes. Others write notes in the margins, mihi ignosce, forgive me, as a silent plea for mercy. There are also notes of fatigue, mi friget manus, my hand is cold, or complaints about the darkness and the quality of the parchment. These tiny glimpses reveal that, for all its discipline, the scriptorium is filled with ordinary men, struggling with the same aches, doubts, and distractions as anyone. The daily pressure for accuracy is matched by an equal pressure for speed. New texts are always in demand: scripture for the chapel, laws for the abbot's office, psalters for teaching the young. And yet, each book requires weeks or months of labor. Illumination, in particular, is slow. Lapis lazuli and gold leaf are precious. Their use requires approval and steady hands. If a single brushstroke goes astray, a whole miniature might be ruined. Sometimes the illuminator must cut out a failed illustration and paste in a new one, hoping no one will notice the repair. The cycle of prayer and labor frames every day. Lauds at sunrise, prime at the third hour, then terce, sext, nun, vespers, and compline. Between these services, the scribe's world is measured in inches: the length of a quill, the width of a margin, the distance from one illuminated capital to the next. Days blur into weeks, months, seasons, pages stacking up, stories crossing from one life into another. In rare moments of rest, the scribe might wander the cloister garden, rubbing ink-stained hands against rough stone, watching the birds peck at seed. Sometimes he speaks quietly with a fellow scribe, sharing frustrations or news from another abbey. But more often he returns to his desk, driven by habit, faith, and the quiet fear of falling behind. The result of all this effort is fragile. Books are easily lost. Fire, flood, and theft are constant threats. Mice nibble at bindings, mold creeps in from damp walls. Sometimes entire libraries are dispersed when a monastery closes or is sacked in war. The labor of years can vanish overnight, the knowledge of a generation scattered to the wind. And so, as the scribe finishes another page, setting down his quill and stretching his cramped fingers, he might wonder, how much of what he has written will truly endure? How many of his errors will be discovered? How many stories quietly erased by a careless copy or a misremembered word? As evening falls and the candles are snuffed, a final question lingers. What is the worth of a life spent repeating the words of others? And where does the line fall between preservation and the gentle drift of forgetting? Night settles, and the scriptorium lies in darkness, its benches empty, its precious pages pressed between wooden boards for safekeeping. Yet even as silence takes the stone halls, the slow, steady work of the scribe continues in another sense, a legacy written line by line, page by patient page, stretching invisibly into the future. Sometimes, though, even the best efforts cannot protect what has been created. History is full of half-remembered texts and vanished manuscripts. Fires rage through monasteries. Wars leave libraries plundered. Time itself conspires to gnaw at ink and parchment. Pages are scattered or recycled, cut into strips for bindings, or scraped clean for new words. To be a scribe is to work always against this creeping loss, to know that the words you labor over today may disappear tomorrow. Yet, loss is not the whole story. The scribe's work, humble and repetitive, is also an act of faith in continuity. Each copied text is a thread, and enough threads woven together make a rope strong enough to cross centuries. When one book is lost, another survives. When a scribe, in a distant monastery, picks up his quill and copies your lines, your labor echoes, however faintly, across distance and time. There is a strange, quiet heroism in such persistence. Scribes seldom earn recognition, their names tucked in margins or lost entirely, but the stories, laws, and knowledge they preserved shape worlds far beyond the cloister. Ancient poems, chronicles of kings, heretical treatises, and the quiet prayers of forgotten monks all live on, their letters winding from monastery to monastery, from generation to generation. Occasionally, an error survives too, a skipped line, a reverse letter, a curious margin note that becomes a legend in itself. Scholars of the future puzzle over these quirks, piecing together lost words, debating which versions came first. In some cases, the only sign that a scribe lived at all is a faint fingerprint in the margin, or a playful doodle, or the trembling script that betrays old age or illness. With time, the craft of the scribe changes. Printing presses arrive, at first a curiosity, then a revolution. The careful handwork of the scriptorium gives way to movable type and ink rolled by machine. Many monks lament the change, worrying that the art of copying will be lost, that books will become too common, too crude, too easily spread. Yet even in the age of printing, scribes linger, repairing old volumes, glossing margins, and illuminating the few books deemed worthy of extra care. And always, there are losses, wars, fires, neglect. But there is resilience too. Some texts survive only because a scribe centuries earlier chose to copy a dull legal treatise or an obscure herbal, believing it might be needed again. Generations later, scholars bless those choices, discovering cures, histories, or stories nearly lost to time. So, as you, the scribe, set aside your final page, gazing at the flicker of a candle, you might ask, was it worth it, this lifetime? Spent in quiet repetition, knowing how little is remembered? Is it enough that you became a vessel, letting words pass through you to reach distant eyes? Does the endurance of a story matter more than the anonymity of the storyteller? And as the night deepens and the scriptorium grows colder, one last thought lingers. How much of what we value, our stories, our memories, our very sense of ourselves, depends on those who labor in silence, patient and persistent, to keep the fragile thread unbroken, even as time threatens to unravel it all? The first chill of autumn sweeps through the valley, stealing warmth from the air long before the sun has set. In the shadow of high stone walls, life within a medieval castle grows sharper and more urgent, every movement shaped by the coming cold. You may picture castles as places of endless feasting and roaring fires, but the reality for those who lived behind those thick walls was quite different. A slow, stubborn battle against the relentless damp and chill. You wake in a bedchamber, hung with heavy tapestries, your breath rising as a faint cloud in the dim morning light. The fire in the hearth has long since burned to embers. You pull woolen blankets closer, feeling the roughness of homespun cloth and the weight of furs if you are lucky enough to have them. Cold seeps in through every crack in the stone, through arrow slits and poorly fitting shutters. The walls, built for defense, hold in more chill than heat. The day begins with the sound of servants shuffling along icy flagstones. Their first duty is to rekindle fires, one in the great hall, another in the kitchens, perhaps a smaller hearth in the Lord Solar. Firewood split and stacked in the bailey is precious and must be rationed. Gathering and chopping it is a year-round task, and even so, the best oak logs are saved for the coldest nights and the most important rooms. For the castle's inhabitants, warmth is always a negotiation, a compromise between necessity and scarcity. The great hall where most life takes place boasts the largest hearth. Here, a fire is kept burning almost constantly, smoke twisting up the chimney or, in older castles, out through a hole in the roof. Still, the heat reaches only a few yards. Those who can cluster near the flames. Everyone else layers on clothing, pulls hoods low, and moves as little as possible. It is common for servants and even lesser nobles to work with stiff, cold fingers, their breath visible as they speak. If you step away from the main fire, the cold bites immediately. Stone floors draw warmth from your feet, and icy drafts creep through tapestries no matter how thickly they are hung. Children and old people are especially vulnerable. Illness and discomfort are simply facts of life. To keep out the worst of the chill, straw rushes are scattered across floors, sometimes perfumed with dried herbs. These add a little insulation and soak up moisture, but must be changed often, especially when they become fouled by mud or worse. Most castle rooms are unheated, save for what leaks in from the nearest hearth. The kitchen is one exception. Here, the huge ovens and cauldrons provide a constant, if uneven, heat. Bakers and cooks are among the few who spend winter days warm, though their comfort is paid for in sweat and the constant risk of burns. In the deepest cold, some of the household may sleep in the kitchen, huddled among sacks of flour and the lingering aroma of bread. In the private solar or bedchamber, the struggle for warmth takes other forms. Thick curtains are drawn around beds at night, trapping body heat in a small space. Bed warmers, iron pans filled with hot coals, are slid beneath blankets, a comfort available only to those of some status. For everyone else, extra bodies provide warmth. Children sleep together, servants bed down in crowded corners, dogs are invited onto blankets, and everyone wakes often in the night, chilled or shivering. Washing and bathing are rare in the cold months. Water freezes in the pails, and the effort to heat enough for even a quick wash is rarely justified. Instead, people layer on linen shirts, woolen hose, and cloaks, swapping garments as they become dirty. Bathhouses attached to castles are used, mainly by the wealthy, and even then only occasionally. The smell of sweat, wood smoke, and damp wool fills the air, a background odor that marks every gathering, every meal, every celebration. Despite these hardships, there are small comforts. Spiced wine is heated over the fire, filling the hall with a warm scent. Special winter foods, rich stews, roasted meats, thick breads, offer heat from within, if not without. On feast days, extra logs are burned, music is played, and for a few hours the cold is almost forgotten. But always, the stone walls and winter winds remain. Even the greatest castles, symbols of power and security, cannot shut out the chill for long. As night falls and the fires burn low, you may find yourself wondering, how did people endure these endless winters year after year with so little to keep the cold at bay? What inventions, habits, and quiet compromises made survival possible? And, in a place built to last for centuries, what traces remain of the generations who fought their silent nightly war against the cold? The sun barely rises above the castle walls, casting pale light over courtyards rimmed with frost. If you listen, you can hear the creak of wooden doors, the muffled coughs and clatter of servants as daily routines begin. With each day of cold, life inside the castle becomes a series of strategies, some clever, some desperate, all aimed at holding warmth a little longer. Heating was an art of improvisation. The grand fireplaces and roaring hearths seen in stories were the privilege of only the largest, wealthiest castles. Most rooms, even in great households, lacked any form of direct heat. In response, people layered clothing, linen undergarments, woolen tunics, cloaks, hoods, mittens. Sometimes old cloaks were cut up to patch holes in newer ones, or furs were tacked around the inside of collars and sleeves. The poor made do with whatever scraps they could find. Old clothes sewn into. Quilts are used as makeshift rugs. Windows were another battlefield in the war against cold. Glass, when it appeared, was a luxury. Most castle windows were covered with wooden shutters, oiled cloth, or parchment. On stormy nights, every shutter was closed tight, and drafts still found their way through cracks. In some rooms, windows were bricked up entirely for winter, sacrificing light for warmth. Meals were scheduled with the weather in mind. The largest meal often took place at midday, when the hall was warmest. Great pots of stew, porridge, or pottage were cooked over the fire and shared communally. Eating together was not just tradition, it was a way to bring everyone closer to the hearth. In the evenings, as heat faded, people might gather in smaller rooms, seeking warmth in numbers, sometimes even sharing beds for comfort. The communal aspect of castle life was essential. Unlike the isolation of later centuries, medieval castle dwellers understood that warmth was a shared resource. Lords, ladies, servants, and children all depended on each other in ways dictated by rank, but softened by necessity. On the coldest nights, boundaries between social classes blurred a little. Everyone needed heat, and a crowded room was warmer than an empty one. For those who could afford it, there were technological advances, small, incremental, and often expensive. The introduction of the chimney in the later Middle Ages was a quiet revolution. Earlier, most smoke escaped through holes in the roof, making rooms both cold and smoky. Chimneys allowed fires to burn more efficiently, with less smoke and a better draft. Still, they were far from perfect. Chimneys often smoked, sometimes caught fire and needed frequent cleaning. But in castles where they were installed, the difference was profound. Private rooms could finally have their own fireplaces, and the constant haze in the great hall diminished. Hot stones and bed warmers were other minor miracles. Servants heated stones in the hearth, wrapping them in cloth and tucking them into beds or under benches. Earthenware pots filled with hot water served the same purpose. For the lord's family, elaborate warming pans, shallow metal pans filled with coals, were used to chase the chill from sheets before sleep. Such comforts rarely reached the lower ranks, but everyone found some way to hold on to heat. During the day, people worked to stay warm. Men and boys gathered in workshops where forges and ovens radiated steady heat. Women spun, wove, and cooked close to the kitchen fire. Children, when not pressed into chores, played games that kept them moving. Even meetings and religious observances were scheduled in rooms with the best exposure to sun and fire. Sometimes during the worst cold snaps, people took to sleeping in shifts, those on the night watch warming up by the kitchen or guardroom fire, while others slept in still warm beds. At times, bedding was shared not just with family, but with guests, servants, or favored animals. Dogs and cats were welcome bedfellows, their body heat a valued comfort. Yet all these efforts were only partial victories. Every winter brought tales of illness, coughs that lingered, fevers that took the old and young, the ever-present threat of death from cold or its complications. Even the wealthiest castle dwellers rarely escaped entirely. Rheumatism, chilblains, and winter ague were constant companions. The stone walls that promised security from arrows and enemies also trapped dampness, encouraging mold and chills that no fire could quite dispel. As the days grew longer, people marked the subtle return of warmth. Ice melted from the moat, the first snowdrops pushed up by the gatehouse, and the sun lingered a little later on the western towers. Hope returned with the promise of spring, but memories of cold endured in stiff joints, faded garments, and the constant vigilance against the next long winter. And so, as another fire is banked for the night and the castle slowly quiets, you might wonder, what did warmth mean to those who had so little of it? How did the endless struggle against cold shape their lives, their relationships, their very sense of home? And in the flickering firelight, which comforts were cherished most? Not the grandest hearths, but the smallest acts of kindness and shared endurance? The last embers glow faintly in the castle hearth, casting long shadows up the walls and across the ancient flagstones. All around you, the fortress settles into uneasy sleep. A gentle clatter as shutters are latched, the distant bark of a dog in the bailey, the sigh of wind in the battlements. Inside, warmth has become a memory, shrinking to the small circle of bodies clustered together. each one seeking comfort in heavy blankets and shared breath. The war against cold is never truly won. Even in the deepest winter, with every precaution taken, drafts creep along corridors, biting at ankles and fingers, chilling even the best insulated rooms. People dream of summer, of the brief window when stone walls turn cool instead of icy, when the sun itself is a comfort rather than a distant promise. Yet life endures, season after season, generation after generation. In this, perhaps the truest lesson of castle life is revealed. Comfort is never guaranteed, and endurance is a virtue as valued as courage or wit. You see it in daily routines. Each evening, servants patrol the halls, checking fires and closing up rooms. Water jugs are wrapped in cloth to keep from freezing. Boots and cloaks are set by the fire's edge for morning, but no one expects them to be truly dry. Each new day, the work begins again, carrying logs, sweeping out ashes, shaking out rushes. Every meal, every task is shaped by the effort to keep the cold at bay. In the deepest dark, people find solace in community. Old stories are told and retold around the hearth, each one familiar as a well-worn blanket. The castle's chaplain might recite a prayer for warmth and health. Children huddle close, sleepy and half-listening, their cheeks pink from the fire. Even in silence there is comfort, an unspoken understanding that everyone, from lord to scullion, is bound by the same need. Illness is a constant fear, and each winter leaves its mark. Lost infants, weakened elders, lingering coughs. Remedies circulate. Herbs steeped in warm ale, cloths heated with stones, concoctions that promise relief but rarely offer more than hope. Still, the ritual of care is as important as the result. To tend a sick child or an aging parent is to declare, in the face of all adversity, that comfort matters, that the struggle against cold is also a struggle for dignity. Sometimes the castle opens its doors to travelers or the needy. On the coldest nights, those without shelter are allowed to sleep in barns or kitchens, offered broth and bread, a place near the fire if there is room. Hospitality, once a matter of pride and piety, becomes survival. The memory of such kindness lingers, passed on in stories and in the quiet resolve to repay it someday in some way, and always the architecture remembers. Centuries later, visitors to ruined castles feel the echo of old winters in the damp, echoing halls. Archaeologists unearth fire-blackened stones and layers of straw on ancient floors. Historians trace the evolution of chimneys, the changing design of windows and hearths, each improvement a response to the same old problem. Even in ruins, the story of warmth and cold persists, etched into the very bones of the building. For those who once lived here, survival through winter was not just endurance but a source of pride. To emerge into spring, battered but unbroken, was its own quiet victory. The return of sunlight, the first shoots of green, the slow thaw of streams. These were moments of joy as real and profound as any feast or festival. As you drift into sleep, beneath heavy blankets, the memories of cold soften, replaced by the steady comfort of shared space and the promise of tomorrow's sun. Perhaps you wonder, in a world where warmth is now taken for granted, what have we lost? The resilience, the rituals, the deep appreciation for every flicker of comfort in the darkness. And as you surrender to rest, you might ask, how many silent battles, how many acts of quiet bravery are fought and forgotten in the endless cycle of the seasons, each one shaping the meaning of home for those who come after? The year begins, not with celebration, but with the silent work of waiting. In the vineyard, frost clings to twisted vines, the earth is hard and silent, and the landscape lies wrapped in gray mist. You are the medieval winemaker, or perhaps a hired hand, one of many whose labor keeps the nobleman's table supplied with wine, whose toil is rarely noticed except in times of scarcity or feast. January's days are short and brittle. In the shelter of the shed, you mend baskets, sharpen knives, and run your hands over pruning hooks that have served generations before you. Tools are valuable, passed from parent to child, sometimes repaired so many times the handles seem older than the wood itself. Each one is an heirloom of quiet endurance, silent testimony to winters long past. Pruning is the first true work of the year. Before sunrise, you and your companions move between rows of vines, boots crunching over rime. You cut back last year's growth, a task that is part science, part intuition. Each vine tells its own story. Which tendril bore sweet fruit, which branch grew too wild, which suffered from frost or pest. The right cut means a stronger plant come spring. The wrong one could ruin the yield for years. Your fingers grow numb despite mittens or wraps of rough cloth. Still, the work must be done while the vine slumbers. The chill is a quiet adversary, and every few minutes you pause, blow on your hands and stomp your feet to keep feeling alive. Your back aches from stooping, but there is a satisfaction in the neat rows, the piles of trimmings that will later be burned or woven into baskets. Pruning is more than a chore. It is a moment for thought. As you move along the rows, you recall stories from elders, how the monks in the next valley pruned differently, or how a certain variety of grape must be cut at a slant, never straight across. Some traditions are rooted in observation, others in superstition. It is said that pruning by the moon brings better wine, or that singing to the vines ensures a healthy crop. Whether or not you believe, you hum a song as you work just in case. Beyond pruning, there is planning. The cellar is checked and rechecked, barrels inspected for leaks, racks repaired. Bottles, more often jugs or casks, are counted and cleaned. The best wine from last year is set aside for the lord or abbot, the rest reserved for tithes, feasts, or trade. If the vintage was poor, there is anxiety. If it was good, there is hope for a little comfort or extra coin. Winter is a time for maintenance. Fences are mended to keep out animals. Ditches cleared so spring rains do not flood the roots. Some days are spent grafting new vines, a delicate task that calls for patience and care. Seedlings must be protected from frost, wrapped in straw, or tucked near the warmth of a wall. Wine is not just drink. It is status, medicine, and sometimes salvation. It fortifies those who labor, sweetens celebrations, and is poured as an offering at births, marriages, and funerals. The village priest blesses the first cask of the new season, and every household saves at least a little for holy days. In poor years, the wine is thin and sour, a reminder of how closely your fortunes are tied to sun, soil, and the whims of weather. As the days lengthen and the earth softens, hope stirs beneath the surface. You walk the vineyard at dusk, the air sharper, but full of promise, and imagine the vines waking, sap rising, buds preparing to burst. But for now, winter's watch continues, a season of anticipation, of patience, of quiet faith that your work, invisible as it seems, will be rewarded in the fullness of time. You might wonder, how did winemakers endure the long uncertainty between harvests, and what secrets did they pass on to those who would tend the same vines after them? And what does a single year in the vineyard reveal about the endless cycle of hope, toil, and renewal that shaped medieval life? With spring, the vineyard wakes. The chill of winter slowly recedes, and the hard earth softens beneath cautious steps. Tiny buds appear along the pruned vines, the first fragile promise of the season's crop. You, the winemaker or laborer, begin each day before the sun, squinting at the pale green shoots, searching for signs of life and signs of trouble. Each morning is a new calculation, a survey of growth, of weather, of what might come. The early work is delicate. Buds must be protected from sudden frost, so you and your companions wrap straw around the youngest vines, or light small fires between rows on the coldest nights, hoping to hold disaster at bay. You chase away crows and sparrows, their eyes sharp for the swelling promise of fruit. Fences and scarecrows are mended and repositioned, old tricks remembered and new ones invented in the constant war against pests. As spring deepens, the tasks multiply. The soil must be turned, weeds pulled from between the rows, and new grafts inspected for signs of rot. There is always a threat, aphids or mildew, an unexpected hailstorm, or simply a season of too little or too much rain. Every week brings a new battle, and every hand in the vineyard is called to fight it. You watch the sky, learning to read the patterns of clouds, the behavior of wind, the scent of coming rain. A sudden thunderstorm can strip young leaves and batter tender shoots, but a week of dry wind might parch the earth and leave the vines thirsty. You borrow water from the well or carry it in buckets, sweating beneath the sun. The work is unending, dictated by nature's whims. In between these labors, the vineyard is alive with sound: birds, insects, the laughter and complaints of other workers, the sharp scold of an overseer. You share meals in the shade of the vines, breaking bread and passing a skin of last year's sour wine. News travels quickly. A neighboring vineyard lost half its buds to frost. A distant monastery's vines are sickening with blight. These stories bind the community, each bit of luck or loss a lesson and a warning. With the arrival of summer, the pace quickens. The vines grow thick with leaves and clusters of tiny green grapes appear, swelling with each passing day. You are now locked in a contest not only with pests, but with time. Suckers and excess shoots are pruned away to focus the plant's energy, and the ground is hoed to keep it loose and aerated. Stakes are checked, cords tightened, and each row is inspected for trouble. Black spots on a leaf, a drooping cluster, a telltale web of insects. Summer heat is both a blessing and a threat. Warmth ripens the fruit, but too much can stress the vines. Shade is improvised with bundles of reeds or with carefully grown cover crops between rows. Some traditions hold that speaking softly in the vineyard, never shouting, helps the vines grow. Whether or not you believe this, you find yourself whispering encouragement as you work, or muttering prayers for rain at the right moment. Not all is drudgery. In the evenings, the workers gather by the edge of the vineyard, sharing stories and songs, sometimes sipping a better wine saved from a good year. Old hands teach the young how to spot disease before it spreads, how to train a vine to climb in the right direction, how to read the soil by feel and scent. These lessons are passed down more reliably than any written manual, rooted in observation and repetition. By midsummer, the grapes begin to change color, the first hint of the coming harvest. The air is thick with the smell of earth and growing. Fruit and hope rises with the heat. Yet every winemaker knows that disaster can strike at any moment. One hailstorm, 1 week of unseasonable rain, a swarm of insects, and the promise of the year can be washed away. Vigilance is constant, and every day closes with a survey of what has survived and what must be mourned. You might wonder, how did winemakers endure the uncertainty, balancing hope and fear as the grapes fattened on the vine? What wisdom did they share, and what comfort did they find in the rituals of tending, waiting, and working together? And as the longest days fade and the vineyard glows with ripening fruit, how did communities prepare for the coming harvest, that brief, frantic window when all labor must be rewarded or lost? The harvest arrives suddenly, as it always does, a season anticipated and dreaded in equal measure. In late summer or early autumn, the vineyard changes overnight. Grapes swell and deepen in color, their skins taut with sugar and the promise of wine. The scent of ripening fruit saturates the air, drawing bees, wasps, and every able-bodied person from the village and beyond. This is the moment every decision and labor has been building toward. Harvest must be swift and decisive. A few days. Too early and the wine will be thin and sharp. Too late and rotter weather will claim the crop. You rise before dawn, nerves alive with anxiety and anticipation. The winemaker and elders walk the rows, tasting grapes, debating the right moment, each relying on years of experience, weathered fingers, and sometimes superstition. Word spreads. Tomorrow we begin. Families gather with baskets and knives, children scampering between the vines, laughter mingling with the snap of stems and the thud of grapes dropped into buckets. The entire community turns out. Field hands, neighbors, relatives from distant villages, sometimes even the parish priest or the local lord's steward. Harvest is more than a job. It is a communal rite. The work is relentless. Bent over row after row, you clip heavy clusters, hands sticky with juice and dust. Sun burns the back of your neck, thorns scratch your arms, and yellow jackets hover at every cut. Baskets fill quickly, then must be carried to the press. The heaviest grapes, the best and ripest, are chosen for the Lord's casks. Others are set aside for the village for payment or for trade. In the press house, chaos reigns. The air is thick with the smell of crushed fruit, yeast, and sweat. Men turn great wooden screws or stomp barefoot in vats, coaxing every drop of juice from the harvest. The first pressing goes to the finest wine. Later pressings yield sour, everyday table wine. Skins, stems, and seeds are shoveled aside to be fed to livestock or composted back into the earth. Every part is used, nothing wasted. Nights during harvest blur together. By lamplight or torch, the last grapes are pressed, and the juice flows into barrels lined with pitch or beeswax. The air fills with song, harvest ballads, work chants, the laughter and grumbling of tired voices. Meals are hasty and hearty. Bread, cheese, onions, the year's last fruits, and the first sips of new wine, cloudy and sharp. Stories are swapped, hands compared for stains and calluses, and old rivalries are put aside, at least until the last cask is sealed. When the harvest is done, celebration follows. Even in lean years there is feasting, soup thick with beans and pork, pies filled with apples or pears, fires burning well into the night. A cask is tapped and shared, and toasts are made. To the Lord, the priest, the vineyard, and the hope of better luck next year. In good years the parties stretch for days, in bad ones gratitude clings to every shared loaf. Yet once the feasting ends, a quieter reckoning begins. The winemaker moves alone among the barrels, tasting, watching, worrying. Will the wine keep? Will it sour or spoil? There are endless checks, stoppers to be tightened, leaks to be mended, barrels to be turned and topped up. Some wine is reserved for special occasions or for trade with distant towns. Some is tithed to the church, a payment in liquid form for the prayers and blessing that perhaps kept the vines safe another year. Through winter the new wine matures. The winemaker's work returns to patience, guarding against mold and rot, blending barrels, recording every cask and jug with careful marks in a ledger, sometimes little more than scratches on wood. All the while the taste of the season lingers, the memory of sun and rain, labor and laughter, sweetness and hardship captured in each sip. The cycle is unbroken. Next year the vines will need pruning, the earth will need mending, the people will need hope. The lessons of the vineyard are carried quietly. Patience, vigilance, humility before the weather and the limits of knowledge, gratitude for community and for small mercies. Nothing is certain, but each year offers a new chance, new growth, new wine, and new stories to be shared as the barrels are opened and the toasts are raised. As the last echoes of harvest fade into winter silence, you might ask, what did a year in the vineyard teach those who lived it? Not just about wine, but about endurance, joy, and the fragile rewards of hope. What does it mean to spend your life nurturing something you can never fully control, trusting that with care and luck, your labor will be transformed into comfort and celebration for others? And as you sit by the hearth, swirling a cup of last year's wine and listening to the wind outside, you might wonder, how many hands, how many seasons are remembered in the taste of a single sip?